So I think for today's video I wanted to show you this transfer case, as we've been calling it, and really to describe this, for the purpose of this, I think we need to tell a bigger picture that hasn't really been told much yet. So I'm going to take this off and we're going to go back in time. So I love Shelby Cobras. I'd love to have original. They are ridiculously expensive. I'd love to build a factory 5 or some other kind of beast like that, but by the time I got into it I kind of got shied away because I know I'd want a 427 and need independent suspension. That kind of goes against being cheap once you do all that stuff. And so anyway, at some point my girl said, let's build a go-kart, and that was fine, but I still wanted a Cobra. Well, what spawned some of this was I love the sound of a Harley Davidson, and so I at idle, and they give me that sound of a kind of a Cobra, a 427, a big bore, long stroke, kind of big block sound at idle, and it sounds like a big cam, of course, with the uneven fire order. And so it's kind of said, well, maybe we can just make our own Cobra, and of course this would be it'd be a lot easier to buy something than to make something, but that's where this dream really starts. So starting with the tube frame chassis, it's all made out of 1-inch tubing. It's chrome moly, except for the roll bars are 1.5 inch, and a little thicker wall. And so I made up a jig and bent all these tubes and I've welded it up. And I'm trying to be able to buy as much as I can, not have to make as little as I have to. Is the suspension is from a Miata. And so I got from the junkyard some lower control arms, upper control arms, brakes, spindles, and it's narrowed up. This is smaller than a Miata by a fair amount, but I've used the control arms. Out to the front, I've used Legend 600 parts. If you know the Legend 600 racing series, it's not completely Legend 600s, but it's pretty close. The brakes are from a Miata. The spindles are from a Miata. It required some modifications to the Legend 600, but you'll see some of the genetics and some of the parts are Legend 600 parts. The steering box, for example, is Legend 600. The pedals are from a Miata, junkyard Miata. I was wanting to get the pedal spacing correct enough for hill toe, so that's where the pedals come from, and then adapted to fit into the frame. That's the basics of where this is going. Now, back to the engine sound. So I wanted a Harley. I would have been happy with a VMAX. And as it turned out, my friend Jason had a Buell that a Saturn ended up taking him out. He's okay, but the bike didn't fare very well, and so it was the bike was scrapped. And so for the project, he sold the engine to me. It's a Buell, so 1200cc Buell. It's recognized as a Harley Sportster genetics, and that's what we're using. Well, that's not necessarily the most ideal choice because the output is on the right hand side, and I've got to get it back to the middle. This is going to be a 2-seater, and I need to get it back to the middle of the cart. And so what we need to do is build this transfer case. That's where we get back to what I was describing before, this guy right here. And I've been through a lot of iterations on the best way to make these parts. I'd love to be able to cast some of them, but that's not very close to home with my abilities or the abilities that we have readily available to us. And so, more recently, we've we got at work something called a multi-jet fusion, HP multi-jet fusion, which is a really cool machine, turns out. And so we can start to make some of these case parts out of plastic. It's nylon is the material. And the original intent was to where is this? Is we're able to make printed parts, and that made our ease of prototyping and checking and so on much easier than machining or trying to make molds for the casting these parts. And so these parts in orange here are actually printed MJF material parts. So overall, big picture, what we have is the chain converted from belt drive out of the Buell into a chain drive into this transfer case, offsetting the output to the outside over here, which I will show you in more detail as we get dissect into it and show you where we are status wise on the parts themselves. And I think that's good enough for CAD for now, other than maybe what I'll do is dissect it a little bit. And start to show a little bit about what this thing actually looks like. So starting here, we have this bearing plate left. This I'll explain more, but the output shaft goes through that big hole, and what we also have is a bearing house that gets bolted into that, and then with bearings and seals for this side of the transfer case. What we also have are these guides, and I'll explain more about that later, but that also bolts to this left bearing plate. There's a channel cut into it around the perimeter that ends up being a kind of seal area for the center section. Okay, so then on the center, if we were kind of assembling this up, is we have the these are the printed parts that I was describing before, and what they have is it mostly just houses oil, just keeps oil in the system. And these are printed at this point, which is pretty interesting because they actually are a structurally loaded member. Now, what I have as prototype form is these silver parts in here are going to be metal at some point, but will be steel, machined steel, but right now they're actually printed. The output assembly material for this unit is like this. It goes into that big bearing. That's where it's keyed on the outside out here for the final output back to the rear differential area. This doesn't, it just rotates, it doesn't move at all. What I wanted to show you though is more on the details of this guy right here. This has an eccentric shape around this perimeter here, and then it has a slot right here. And what happens in there is this reverse assembly, this reverse shaft is what sets into here. And what happens, I've got a couple of configurations, but this guy rotates up in this position is for installing the chain, and then as the chain is tightened it goes down to the bottom into a position down here like this. And since it follows, since the arc follows the centroid of the output shaft, then the spacing between the gears are common. When I say the gears, it's this one behind here and this one here, because what we'll be doing is shifting these guys back and forth to get the different kinds of positions. So what we're in is a drive position right now, where this gear, this big gear, doesn't do anything. It's just a flywheel. Alright, so I'm going to turn on the engine for a quick look. The chain comes around here. This face bolts up to the back of the Buell transmission. And then the way this works is that When it's in drive, then the chain is going clockwise in this direction, which drives this output assembly in the clockwise direction, which is good. You'll notice that the idler here, which let me just put it into a different position. The idler here is just being driven, and it's going in the counterclockwise direction when it's being driven. Notice the output of the transmission only goes clockwise in this view. It cannot be reversed. There is no reverse inside of the transmission. And so what we're doing with this transfer case is two things: offsetting the power from the right side of the transmission to the center of the cart. And while we're doing it, we have a chain adjuster, and while we're doing the chain adjuster, we're going to make a reverse. So here's how the reverse works. So here's neutral first of all. We'll explain it later, but we have a spline shaft that is split. On this driven member, it is it's freewheels on top of the axle. We've machined it, and so when we go to forward direction, it meshes over. It's kind of like a Jeep front end, if you're familiar with that. That collar meshes over on top of that and binds the input and output shafts together. Pretty cool. When we go to neutral, or excuse me, reverse, and what we're going to do is slide it over further, and that's going to mesh these two gears back here so that, remember, this one is going in the opposite direction, or excuse me, oh sorry, I said that wrong. It's also going in the clockwise direction. Now it's going to drive this guy in the counterclockwise direction, which is tied to the output shaft, and that's how we're going to get our reverse. Pretty crazy. It's kind of modeled after a snowmobile. The snowmobile reverse doesn't have the chain tensioner, I don't think, and so it's kind of a perversion of what's been done before. So again, clockwise, clockwise. This guy also goes clockwise. When we go in reverse, then this goes counterclockwise, and that's how we get our reverse. That's the basics of it. There's some other details, like we have up here we have a shift mechanism and a shift fork. Let me turn off that top cover here for a second, and what you'll see is two of those, I guess, is a shift fork. That's what's maintaining the position of the output drive gear onto the output drive shaft, and to give us our different functions. So again, this is in the forward direction. This is the neutral position. This is the reverse position. All governed by the shift fork. That shift fork, by the way, I was making my own, and then at some point I had a broken Jeep, and the shift fork was the broken part. It wouldn't shift into four-wheel drive, and the front axle wasn't engaging, and that's what the problem was. It was cracked on this part. Once I pulled that out, I went, wow, that looks a lot like what I need for my project here. And so I did some redesign work to be able to adapt and use that Jeep part. Okay. So to finish this case off, let's put it back in forward, is that we have also some, let's put our top cover back on. So that guy, oh, there's a chain cover. This is a machined part. This gets all assembled together. This is how you assemble the internals, is when it's in this position here. And then the last thing we do is the right cover. There it is. And behind here then is also another bearing and bearing retainer area around the inside of this guy. And that's buttoned up, and at some point when I get all the real parts, then we'll seal it all up so it can hold oil well, and hopefully it works okay. That's been the challenge. We've been working on this now actually for a few years. It's been difficult to get our materials figured out and get enough machine time to play with it, and the design has evolved, but we made it. We're mostly there. We've got a number of printed parts that probably will become machine parts, but it's good enough to show right now what we've got, and we've been starting to test, install it, and seat everything up in real life. So where do we go from here? Let me just turn on a couple parts and kind of look ahead. back to the chassis. Let me turn off covers. We've got the engine then that we'll set in the chassis. We'll have a front motor mount down in here. You'll see that's actually a printed part currently. Eventually we'll have a welded sheet metal part welded and bent. And then we'll have this transfer case here giving us the offset power to the center of the cart, as well as the ability to shift to reversed. And then into the future, what we'll be working on is what I call the power plant frame from kind of Mazda designs, the way they do things. I'll just turn it on so you can see it, but it's basically a chain guard. And then it's going to bring power back here to a converted differential, which we have mostly done. And that will give us our independent drive axles for each wheel. And these are shortened Miata axles and MOVAC actually. And that will get us a drivetrain so that we're getting closer to be able to drive this thing, which is very exciting. There's the tutorial. So now we're going to go to the real world. Alright, this is the MJF center section. The left bearing plate will have the output. Got this bearing mount. Got this eccentric. You'll see later. This is for tightening the chain. It also ends up being for the reverse shaft. The MJF has this ring around it. It will eventually seal up with some sealant, and the plate has the same. These screws really are just to temporarily hold it together during assembly. That will provide much structural value other than for this lip right here to pull it in tight. So this has a mating guide, cuts for it to go around too. These cross tubes they go from side to side, and these are actually what holds the position. It should sandwich up against this guy, but this will help align everything up, these cross tubes. So the output shaft goes like that. These eccentrics that Star described fit in like this. Reverse gear. That. And we got the drive sprocket.
That's the way life works. You get a couple extra dollars and something's going to swoop in and vacuum it up.
Well, she wants she's wanting to get out from underneath that the mom-dad loan.
Yeah, I hear the loan officers are pretty.
Yeah, she's tired of paying that 32% compounded monthly. When I told her I loaned her money on her card, I said, you're going to pay interest. She's like, what's that? And she said, well, that's not right. I said, well,
Literally, our education system has failed you if you don't know it.
oh, no, she wondered how much it was. And that's when I told her 20%. And she's like, well, that's not right. I said, hey, you don't get money for nothing.
Fixed for free.
quite a start, right? Yeah, I think you got it. Yeah. One thing about it, you definitely rip your hand apart. Yeah. Yep. There's my neutral light. There. I'm just bringing the idle down a little bit is all. That's good. Okay, well, that's really what I want to see for now. Huh. Cool. So, that's pretty amazing. Yeah, so we got a forward. I didn't try reverse yet. Oh, you haven't? Well, I couldn't get it in either, but I'll probably have to I need to adjust the clutch a little bit. Oh. Because it's just barely releasing. I see. Okay. Or that's what it feels like anyway. But that gives us, anyway, we got forward and then I had it in reverse. So we got forward and, neutral. Okay. Is all I've tried so far, and it seems to be there. Not hearing any bad noises. Yeah, and just free spinning it by hand, you know, both of those felt great and didn't seem to have any problem. It was reverse that was like, feels a little, by hand, you know, it was like, it just didn't feel like I wanted it to feel. So I'll probably want to bring the IR gun over and just watch the temperature of the, outside the bearings. Yeah. See if they're getting warm. I mean, it's cold over here. This side's got the pipe next to it, so I don't know what to expect, but I'll probably have to hang up these pipes a little bit and figure out how to get them up in the air and just hair so not touching. Mm-hmm. Well, that's cool so far. Yeah. Yeah, how nice. Boy, it sounds good. Huh? You like the sound? Oh, yeah. I don't know what else Harley's got going for them, but the sound they do. Okay, there's reverse, so it went in with it not turning, huh? Yeah, so the way I've done it manually is, I'll grab the shaft and just, because you have to line up the gears. It's just like a regular car, is you're sliding in two meshing gears. Yeah, okay. And so you have to get them, timed so they'll actually go in. So once there's, I guess, a load,
Will you
on
be able
the,
to measure it if you just let your
you
clutch
just,
out?
yeah, you'll just let the clutch out and let things move a little bit. Right now, this guy will want to move with it probably, so,
Yeah, or get just so the wheels don't turn.
yeah,
Yeah.
yep. Well, I think I want to look inside and watch it for a minute. There we go. Oh, yeah, so that answers one of my questions. So that's splashing the oil up to here. It's going to track into here, and then, you know, I don't have it moving down there yet because there's hardly any oil in it, but
Yeah.
I think that's probably going to work. It's going to fling that oil up there and then let it drip down over here.
Yeah. Huh. Very good.
Okay, I'm going to fire it up. The clutch is all the way down, and now it's releasing a little bit. So, but it's not as much. I need to adjust the clutch out a little bit so it's got more control. That's cool.
That's so. Wow.
So then that gear, that oil up here is probably from that to be lined up there. And so that means it's getting flung around pretty good. So part of what I've wondered is, you know, how much oil would you want or need? You know, you don't want any more than you need because it just creates friction, right? But just the little bit I've squirted in there is getting around. And so I think if, you know, the lowest part in there that moves is this reverse gear, is if it just had enough oil in there to fling it around, it probably is, it might be enough. I don't know. It's going to be hard to tell how, you know, I'm going to, like I say, find that other cover and poke a hole in it. I'm really worried about the two bearings, right? That one over there is by the chain, which is going to be down in the oil. I think it's going to have oil going everywhere.
Yeah.
But that one's the one I'm worried about.
Yeah.
And so that's why I built that channel. Try and get it over there and drip down on it.
What's the oil level gonna be? It's still a guess, huh?
Oh yeah, well that's what I mean. I'm not sure I need more than like a ½ inch in the bottom.
Oh, really? Huh.
I don't know that, but that's kind of what I'm guessing at this point. Okay, looks like we got some battery. Okay, well, I think I'll put a little oil in it. And see if I can see how the oil's scattering around in there. I think what I didn't show last time though was the showing it in reverse, so I guess we'll show that a little bit. Okay, we're in reverse right now. The fork governs that. All right, so I put a little bit of oil in it. I can see that it's turning inside of there. In fact, maybe I ought to make a visual on what do we got here. So I can see it turning in the oil. The reverse gear, the big drive gear is in it. The chains look like it's dipping in it, so I think we'll spin it and see how much oil we get transferred around. So make a judgment of how much oil we need to have in it when it's operating. Alright. Firing the hole. Okay, so we're definitely getting oil scattered up into the top here. Not very clear that, well, yeah, there's oil in the gutter. So I guess that means oil's getting up into the gutter and transferring over, and that's the idea, is to get over to this other side. just be able to tell if we're getting oil all the way. The bearing over here. I'll let it run for a bit. Yeah, did it close?
I'll come out here and find it pitched over,
Yeah,
and this person can die from that stuff.
yeah. Well, to see some oil down in there, I'm really not seeing it.